Hi Enrico.
Hi, how's it going?
Very well. Today we're talking about Standard 8, instructional strategies. So just to dive right in, because I know you're very busy man. Put the music on too to get us going. So I did a lesson on medieval, on the medieval period, and I did that with the grade 6s, 6Hs. I actually met with Enrico earlier on this week to discuss that because I was struggling to find interesting medieval pictures as part of my class. But unfortunately, I deleted the video somehow. So what the lesson was about was it was going to be a introduction to the medieval period, and I decided that in order to do that, I was going to come up with different paragraphs that I've included with Standard 8. Different paragraphs, and the students had to match the titles to those paragraphs and then summarize those paragraphs. That way they'd be teaching each other, right? Instead of me teaching them, and it worked quite well in the end. Actually, the students read to each other. The students had no trouble. Well, they had a little bit of trouble matching the titles to the paragraph. A lot of them just sort of guessed which one was which instead of really getting into the depth of the paragraphs. Yeah. But as I went around and as I monitored the students and made sure they were doing the right thing, I pointed out those mistakes and they were able to correct them very quickly. That took about 15-20 minutes itself, and it really worked as a good way to introduce to the lesson the different cultures of the medieval ages. So they learned about school from those paragraphs, they learned about fashion, they learned about food, they learned about cities, and they learned about feudal life, things like that. So it went quite well, and they did learn from each other. After that, I then got them to summarise what they'd learned, and I wrote that on the board so that students could check their answers. And yeah, that went quite well. Okay. The second thing I did was what you helped me with, which was showing them bits of art and seeing what they could take away from that. So one of the first pictures that they saw was like a castle, and I asked them, what does this show us about medieval life? Yeah. And they said things like, oh, it must have been very dangerous. I sort of talked to them about where castles came from, about Viking raids, and I linked it to the lesson previous, which was about Vikings. Yeah, good. Yeah. So they learned about Viking raids, and I said, yeah, these castles were built primarily to keep Vikings out. And before I did all this as well, I did something great that Enrico helped me with, which was to give me some monasteric, is that what we call it? Monastic music. And I closed all the curtains as well. And it was really, really dark in there, and then I played the music, and then I brought up these wonderful, colourful medieval images. And this is something Enrico's used before and worked extremely well with them. It was a bit funny, so I was fiddling with the volume button because sometimes I'd have it very, very loudly, and you'd have these monks singing their hymns, and then other times like I had to have it very, very quietly. At the end of the lesson, I asked the students what they thought. They said they loved the music, but they said it was a bit depressing, which I guess sums up the medieval age pretty much anyway. But it worked very well, yeah. So we had the students not only working together with our first activity, but also sort of analysing different sources, which is one of my standards, analysing primary and secondary sources. And one of the standards is also coming up with knowledge prior to previous learning. So they were coming up with new knowledge by sort of answering these open-ended questions and analysing them and saying, what can you get from this? So some of the other images that were on there were also sort of monastic paintings. So they learned through these images that they were deeply religious in Europe at that time. A lot of their life was centered around religion. And then one of the other images that I remember prominently playing in the students' mind was one of disease. And there was lots. I think it was one of disease.
Yeah, the Black Death.
The Black Death one, and they sort of got that. At the times, it was very different in terms of health and standards of cleanliness as well. So they took all that away from it. So let's go through these standards. Adapting instruction to students' needs. It's the first time I've tried this with the students, and I thought that it would work, and it did. So I feel like the two activities that were the main activities were fantastic in that sense. The resources were new because they had some music in the class. And also they were analysing these sources, which is something they haven't done so much. So I think I did that quite well. When it came to monitoring the students' learning, I think I did that quite well as well. I was going around, I was making sure I was continuously monitoring their student learning, assessing their progress. I don't know how much I adjusted the instruction, but I just made sure that they were on the right track and made sure they knew what they were doing. My role was as an instructor, as a facilitator, as a coach, and at one point as the audience when it came to that first activity. So I think that one worked quite well. Engaging students in skill development, I think it's the first time that they've interpreted and evaluated new information such as sources, so I feel like I've done that one. And asking questions, we were open-ended questions. I was probing for student understanding with these sources and trying to get them to really think about these different ideas in new ways. So I think I've hit those standards as best as I could, and I was quite happy with that lesson overall.
Okay. Well, the great thing is we were talking about adjusting, teaching. The great thing about imagery and audio or visual material is it reaches everybody. So you kind of have to do less adjustment. You'll get different levels of output from different levels of students, but everybody can respond to that, as opposed to a complex text which some students might get and others might really struggle with and not really comprehend. Everybody can understand the picture.
I think, definitely. I think that's something I'll definitely be using a lot more over the next term. It's a lot more visual, a lot more audio, instead of just sort of here's a passage, read through it. So thank you for helping me with that. And is there anything else?
No, that's all.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for listening today. Have a good day, Enrico. Bye bye.